but also I'm kind of like, do they even believe the things that they're saying? I feel like it's just kind of
Mm.
to make people mad on purpose.
Mhm. Hey everyone, welcome to Lovecast, the BL podcast. I am your host, Alexa, and I have my fellow hosts, Pixie and Kayla, with me today.
Hey.
Hi.
Hello, hello. So today's topic is a bit of a doozy. It's definitely on the heavier side of things, but it's something we've touched on, addressed here and there in previous discussions on Lovecast in previous episodes. So we wanted to sit down and kind of break down this discourse that we see rising up amongst BL fans every few months. It seems like it's like clockwork. Every 6 or 8 months or something like that, we see this discourse pop up again. And it's like this battle between BL from East Asia and BL from Southeast Asia. And the fans basically fighting over which country makes the better BL shows. And it always circles up into this big discourse. And there's so many different aspects of it and things to discuss around it. So we kind of thought it's been circling around in social media spaces again in the last couple of weeks. So we thought it would be timely to kind of sit down and really talk about it head on. So for those who might not know, because I think mostly I see this on Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure it's on places like My Drama List and Reddit and other social media sites. But for those who might not really be on social media and don't really know what this discourse is or haven't really seen it circling before, it basically boils down to fans of BL arguing over which country makes the better BLs. And people kind of argue for the country that they, I don't know why I put country in quotes. I meant to put argue in quotes. People kind of argue um, for the country that they most often watch or enjoy BL from. But more often than not, it kind of breaks down into this dichotomy of East Asian BL, so BL from Korea and Japan, versus Southeast Asian BL. Most often, usually it's Thai BL that people focus on.
Yeah.
And so it becomes into this big battle of like, what constitutes a good BL? What constitutes a good BL? What country does it better? All that kind of stuff. And it surfaces honestly anytime like a show gets really popular amongst and outside the fandom. So, you know, when things like Kim Porsche or Love in the Air got really popular in Thailand, it roused up again with some of the discussions around like how things were portrayed in that show, and kind of started the discourse there. And this time it came mostly from what I saw as a result of the Korean series that was recently released, Love in the Big City. So this show had a lot of impact online. It was something that was being very heavily, I think, advertised isn't the right word, but fans were advocating for it very heavily because it was getting a lot of pushback from conservative groups in Korea. And there was a lot of pushback to basically not let the show air. And so because of that, I think it had a lot of impact, and a lot of people on social media were kind of following the show and excited to watch it. So this time, that's kind of what roused the discourse. We've also seen it pop up a lot around the topic of remakes, countries remaking shows from other countries. So we recently saw it with Love in the Air, Koi, the Japanese version of Love in the Air. We've seen it with Cherry Magic Thai and My Love Mix-Up Thai. So like this idea that certain countries aren't capable of making quality remakes also often comes up around this discourse. So yeah, I think we have a lot of different points and themes to dive deeper into. It's a very nuanced conversation. Obviously, we're only three people and we only have our perspective. And there's a lot to this even beyond what we'll be covering here in this discussion.
Yeah.
So just kind of putting that disclaimer out. We're just one perspective. We're just three people kind of discussing this. And we're definitely not trying to like advocate for or against BL in any country or anything like that. Like we love all BL and we just kind of want to
Yeah.
break down why this
Yeah.
always comes up in this like routine
I can
format.
just start this discussion by saying that I think this is the most stupidest thing to argue about in the world. What?
Me
But yes,
too.
let's discuss.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always I feel like I always have so many thoughts every time it comes up, and it always feels like very frustrating to see the same points circling again and again each time. So yeah, we had some thoughts and points to dive deeper into. Kayla, I know some of the first points we put on there were kind of ones that you had broken down, so I don't know if you kind of want to lead that section of the discussion.
Yeah. So obviously, as a Filipino American, I had so many opinions and thoughts on this. I always have every time it comes around, but I think
Mm-hmm.
especially this time it went so viral, just the discourse that it's almost like there are so many layers to it that I almost had trouble wrapping my head around why it
Mm-hmm.
bothered me or like why I
Mm-hmm.
thought this was stupid, quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly.
Yep.
Um, so it's so funny. I had like a meeting, an emergency meeting with myself and my sister and my mom, and I was like, okay. I asked them the question, why do you think that people look down on Southeast Asian media and kind of
Mm-hmm.
like platform East Asian media? And so we had this like whole analytical discussion about it. And
Love
it
it.
really helped me to, I think, put my thoughts together on why I just think it's so bizarre
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah,
um,
no.
pin them against each other. I don't know. Yeah.
100%. I had a very hard time like when we were first putting together the topics and like points in this. I was like really struggling. I was like I don't know how to articulate why some of these things bother me and how to put into words like what I'm trying to say around them. So it was like very hard to kind of put it into words and like get those feelings out about it. So yeah, I think discussing it will also like having this conversation in real time will kind of
Mm-hmm.
help work out some of those thoughts.
Definitely. But I feel like the first theme that we just should just like dive right into is calling a spade basically and bringing up the xenophobia racism aspect of an
Mm-hmm.
opinion like that. Um like there has historically been this perception that Southeast Asia is dirty, um and that like the things that they produce are cheap and kind of
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
like low class in a way compared to maybe East Asia or America. There's just like always been that sort of perception about Southeast Asia in general. And I think it's in part because East Asia developed like very quickly. I think like
Mm-hmm.
people always talk about how Korea went through like this massive boom in just like infrastructure, and they became like more and more globalized through K-pop and K-dramas, and there's just like this perception that I think Southeast Asia has their shit together more, maybe in terms of like economics and politics, and then of course like their media. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
so maybe people think that Southeast Asia doesn't have as much to offer in terms of all of that, but especially in this case, media. And I think that there's like a very specific sort of evil that goes into it with the beauty standard of Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, you know, we keep talking about like the Korean versus Thai because that's what made this discourse come up again. So it's like,
Two heavy hitters.
yeah, it's like obviously there's a lot of colorism in Asia, in everywhere,
Mhm.
everywhere to be honest. Um and this
Mhm.
like beauty standard of having the light skin and looking a certain way, and a lot of times being held to Korean beauty standards, despite like what
Mm-hmm.
country it is. It seems like Korean beauty standards really have had an impact on Asia and even Southeast
Mm.
Asia, whether it's through like skincare or K-pop,
Mm-hmm.
just like celebrity culture, stuff like that. Um,
Mhm.
and people even like will call Southeast or people will call Southeast Asians jungle Asians, which kind of again
That
like
is
that.
like a step closer to calling someone a monkey.
Right. It's like the use of a word like that is, again, it's coming back to like people maybe thinking that Southeast Asia is more uncivilized
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm.
I don't know, something
That's
like that.
crazy.
And then like of course East Asians, people kind of think of them as like the rich Asians or like the fancy Asians.
Mm-hmm.
Um So basically, there are a lot of preconceived notions about the
Mm.
cultures and the people that I think play into this opinion of like Korean BLs being this like
Mm.
amazing, great, perfect, I guess, representation of BL and queer media, and then Southeast Asia just being like softcore porn, which is usually the argument is that Thai BLs are very sexually explicit, which obviously we know that's not necessarily the case
Have
across
we
the
been
board.
watching the same BLs?
Right.
Because I would say that the Thai BLs are pretty, I mean, they aren't that sexual. Like I would say that the sexually charged KBLs are heavier than most of the Thai BLs most of the time.
I think it goes back to this whole thing of virality.
Mm.
So, shows
Mhm.
that have gone very viral on social media in the BL sphere are
Mhm.
shows like Kin Porsche and shows like Love in the Air. And, we've kind of talked about how I think with any type of media, sex sells. So when these clips from things like Kim Porsche or Love in the Air or any of the other like what's considered saucier Thai BLs go viral, and those are the ones that have kind of expanded beyond the BL niche community. Like
Mhm.
I've recently seen, I don't know what their YouTube channel is, but these two British guys who react to like LGBT media have been reacting to Kin Porsche. And so like, I feel like that's like it's one of those shows that's gotten way beyond like the BL niche, and it kind of becomes a representative of the genre, even though we know the Thai BL genre is, when it comes to BL, like one of the most expansive ones, because the
Yeah.
live action has been around for over 10 years at this point, and they have a lot. It's very saturated at this point, but you get those one or two shows that everyone associates with the genre, and they think that's all there is to it,
Yeah.
basically.
I I I'm just gonna say, like, I hate the take that because there's anything like spicy in a show, that means that it's not like quality or good
Mhm.
storytelling.
Right.
I
Mhm.
hate that take. Like, all shows can be crap, whether they have spice or not. But I do. You get into an area of like purity culture bullshit,
Mhm.
and there's nothing dirty or bad about sex or sexuality or spice in general.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's all
Mhm.
about how you handle it in the show. And there's various degrees of success there, but still,
Yeah.
I hate that argument.
Yeah. No,
Mhm.
100%. Yeah, we do have like one, like our next topic is kind of talking about purity culture and
Mm,
demonization of sex and that kind of
mhm,
stuff. But before we veer off that way. I wanted to say, Kayla, when you were talking about like this idea that Southeast Asia is seen as like less civilized, and the media and the outputs of it are seen as like maybe dirty or less civilized compared to East Asia and other countries. It made me think of this is kind of bringing it back to the Western side of things, but there is this like thing in Hollywood whenever they're portraying like a country, like a third world country or a country with like down in like South America or something like that. You've seen people call out how they'll like put this yellow filter or whatever over the editing to like make the country seem dirtier and, you know, make them seem like, you know, we're all gritty and dirty when we're in this country, but when we're on like America and the UK or whatever, like, you know,
bright,
the color grading is completely different. So it kind of made me think of like that dichotomy and how there's just like this inherent belief that Southeast Asian countries can't put out like high quality productions, and that their production value is always going to be a little bit lower compared to Korea or Japan, and obviously the economies and their media and their, what's the word? What, not just media. I don't know what word I'm looking for. I guess media industry. Industries are very different, but also like they're different countries, so I don't think these same expectations should be held to them the same way I don't like expect Korean media to have the same kind of standards as American media. Like, I don't know, I just don't think there's like a blanket expectation we can put on like this is what media from every country should look like. So this idea that Thai BLs need to be putting out the same kind of productions as Korea or Japan is weird to me, because like what their countries value in production are going to be different because they're different countries. And also like obviously we've seen that the idea that these countries can put out high quality production is just not true.
Crazy. I remember when Squid Game came out and everyone was so fucking surprised that it was a good show. And I'm just sitting there having watched K-dramas forever, and I'm just like, what are you talking about? It's not that great.
Yeah, like, I remember a lot of people who routinely watch Korean media when Squid Game came out were like, it's fine. Like it's fine. Not the best thing I've watched from Korea.
I've seen better, but great that you think it's great. No. Yeah.
I don't even know where to go from there. I mean, the whole purity culture side of it, I'm almost inclined to think that people's issue isn't actually with NSFW content, and it's the fact that Southeast Asian people are doing it. Does that make sense? Because like Korean, some of the BLs, they're kind of in there with the spice. So it's like, again, it's like holding them to different standards and already having this preconceived notion about one being porn, but the other somehow being artistic when it's the same thing. Yeah.
One of the tweets I saw that kind of like I had on the back of my mind about this whole discussion was one of the sex scenes from Love in the Big City, and someone had been like, Thai BLs could never. And so it's like this weird thing. It's like, so when, you know, like when a Korean BL you like does like a spicy sex scene, you're like, oh yeah, Thai BL could never do that. But like when Thai BL does a spicy sex scene, then you're like, oh, this is all they have to offer. So it's like, what is the truth? What, I don't understand like what people want. And it's just kind of this idea that it's because like it's a Southeast Asian sex scene or a sex scene from a Southeast Asian BL, like it's seen as lesser than, but like when a Korean BL does it, like this is what a sex scene should be, or when a Japanese BL does the spicier side of things, like, oh, this is how you do it right. Like, what is right? That's like, I just want someone to sit down who has this mindset and explain to me, what do you mean by the right way to do a sex scene without being racist or xenophobic? Like, please explain it to me, because I'm not really
I mean,
it
even
doesn't click.
within, like, if we're talking about KBL, even within KBLs, there's differences in how they handle sex scenes. Hwang Da-sol has a completely different way to handle it than Love in the Big City,
Mm-hmm.
because I know she's talked before about not wanting to her shows to have explicit sex in them, and that's fine. And she focuses more on yearning and feelings, and just showing showing the yearning, basically,
Mm-hmm.
than the actual smut.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
While Love in the Big City is kind of like in your face.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that either of those shows are doing it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the point. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think, like, unless someone is like, and there have been discussions about people who do have like this puristic idea of how sex should be portrayed in BL, and like we've kind of touched on that discussion before. But like if they're not coming from it from like a purity cultural perspective, or like this idea that this is the only way sex can be shown, then like why does it matter how they choose to show it? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a production preference or whatever you want to call it. But in my brain, as long as they're not trying to demonize queer sex, and like queer sex can be shown however they want to show it in a show,
Yeah.
and there's no right or wrong way to do it. um and you know, we kind of have talked about this idea that this kind of discussion leads back to the idea that people do kind of view queer sex still as a dirty thing, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why there's so many people who want to police the way it's shown on TV. And this even
Mm-hmm.
goes beyond just BL. Like this is just in general, queer sex is very still demonized across all
Yeah.
types of media, and people are very particular about the way it's being shown. So Akela, like I think you have in your notes, like combine that with the perception of like Southeast Asian people as lesser than compared to like the East Asian beauty standards, or less attractive or whatever, then like it, like you said, it makes Thai BL almost like a punching bag for people who have like this weird complex of beauty complex with homophobia and like these ideas about queer sex and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just crazy how there's like, again, like the idea that like if there's a not safe for work scene in a show, then it has to serve a purpose to the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
But like then I think of all the hetero shows that have so much sex in it and it serves nothing to the plot, and no one really says anything about that. So
Have you
it kind
watched
of,
Bridgerton?
yeah, it kind of goes back to the homophobia thing,
Mm-hmm.
homophobia part of it with
Definitely.
like, I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting that it's like one thing, it's like they're saying that it's done tastefully, but even that, I'm like, what does tastefully mean? I
Yeah.
feel
Mm-hmm.
like words like these are so subjective that it's
Mm-hmm.
like they'll mean something different to everyone, and there's really no standard to it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know.
maybe there's also like a cultural thing at place with like what they're able to show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because, you know, some
Definitely.
countries are more strict. Obviously, like
Mm-hmm.
we've had a lot of the Chinese BLs kind of just get like wiped from
Mm-hmm.
existence. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But like with the Chinese BLs, if you talk to a Chinese BL fan who watches that shows, they will say they are extremely intimate, because they're reading between the lines of like
Mm,
culturally, what does cut sleeve mean? Like what does that movement mean? Like they
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of like culturally things that they can notice in the speech and the way things are done, that makes it become really intimate for them,
Mm-hmm.
which someone who don't know the language or the culture can't pick up on.
mhm,
So yeah, your perception of a show depends on who you are
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and where you're
yeah.
And what
culturally from.
exactly how you're understanding it. Yeah. I mean, I think if you look back at the different countries that are producing these shows, even just going beyond where LGBTQ rights are sitting at in those different countries, just the dichotomy. I don't know why I keep using the word dichotomy because it's not the word I'm looking for. But just like the general government and leadership in these countries is very, very different. You know, Love in the Big City got a lot of pushbacks from conservative groups, not just because it was queer, but because, well, mostly because it was queer. But the country of South Korea as a whole is a more conservative leaning country, even just beyond queer sex, around sex in general, around women's sexuality and things like that. So, versus, you know, Thailand, when it comes to the queer community, you know, they just recently got marriage equality. Their rights aren't perfect, but things are a little bit further on maybe than in a country like Korea, further progressive than in a country like Korea. And so like when I think about it from that perspective, like when you look at a show like Love in the Big City that is explicitly showing these queer sex scenes, like I can see why it's significant.
Why are we comparing? That's like my question to all.
Right.
Why are we comparing this?
You
It
can't.
all has value in its own
Thank you. Yes.
existence.
Yes, thank you. That's where I was trying to get at with that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It makes me honestly sad to see BL fans have or like push the purity culture thing onto the genre because even that historically comes from such a dark place in LGBTQ plus history. Like purity culture was pretty much a direct response to AIDS and was being pushed in a religious way. At least like in the US, I guess that's the only perspective I can speak on it on. But it's like so many people died from that, died from like the repercussions of this purity culture and like pushing it and this perception they were having that gay men are dirty and that they like have AIDS and all this stuff. Like there's so much really horrible history behind it. And I don't know if people just like ignore it or they're not aware or I don't know, but it's just like, I just wish they would like maybe sit down and really think to themselves where this opinion is coming from.
Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to put aside things that are uncomfortable to think about. Which is where, like, talking about AIDS and all that, like, if it's not affecting them directly and stuff, they'll, okay, I've heard about it, but yeah. So I think that most people just put it to the side and don't want to think about it, especially in today's world where there's a lot of shit happening. But it doesn't mean that it's right. And yeah, I also had a point that I forgot. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I have seen like this general, and like I've seen this a lot in like queer creators I follow and queer communities I follow. There has been this discussion of like purity culture kind of like making a comeback in the queer community and that kind of imposing of purity culture. I mean, we've seen a lot of discussions around like what should be allowed at Pride recently and like what kind of displays of queerness should be allowed at Pride, specifically in regards to like kink communities and like that kind of stuff, and people showing out for their kink communities at Pride and that kind of thing in recent years. So I think the idea of like purity culture working its way back into queer communities and queer media has been like a larger issue that has been discussed in recent years as well. And so like obviously
I mean, it also ties into some people believing that women shouldn't be a part of a queer or a gay sexual depiction on screen. That there's a discussion like women have no place there, that we've heard, and that's why some people are very for the whole purity culture in BLs.
Yeah.
But I will say this, like, about purity culture and stuff in BLs specifically. BLs haven't gone far enough, I think, that it warrants a discussion of reining it back. It hasn't gone far enough. I know Playboy tried. They were at the limit. They tried, but it hasn't gone far enough to start having a discussion about toning it down.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how, like, when you've been in the fandom for long enough, and I've been watching BL since 2017. I know you guys have both been consuming BL media for longer than that. It's kind of interesting when you see it go from, like, people begging for there to be more intimacy and better kiss scenes and, like, all this stuff, to now it's like we're circling back to, like, well, that's too much sex. Like, that's not how sex should be in shows. And it's just like, how did we get where did we go in the last couple of years that we went from wanting to see more intimacy and people bashing on shows where they would, barely kiss or only do the fake out kiss and stuff like that, to suddenly being like, well, this kind of sex that they're showing is now too much sex, and that's not what we want. So it's like, where, I don't know, it's just so weird to see it, like, circle back to this point that it's getting to with some parts of the fandom now.
So bizarre. It's almost like the media used to be the conservative one, but now the audience consuming it are the conservative one.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
And yeah, I don't know if this has to do with just, like, BL as a whole becoming, it's still a very niche genre, but it has obviously expanded and gotten a lot bigger over the last couple of years, and more people are exposed to it. So I don't know if just the fandom getting bigger has brought in all of these different viewpoints that are kind of permeating the fandom and, kind of permeating and pushing these different mindsets. But yeah, it's so weird that there's kind of been this, like, switch.
I mean, to me, the argument that they're having, the discourse about sex in BLs and all that, sounds childish. Like, the whole argument sounds like someone who hasn't thought through what they're talking about and just haven't developed their brains enough to think.
I think that's where so much of this argument comes from, is like, we're arguing on Twitter and people are
14-year-olds arguing about sex and BLs.
Even the adults. It's just like, I think the social media culture, and especially on places like Twitter, where I've mostly seen this discourse happen, it just encourages people to talk and quote tweet things and post these tweets without putting any actual thought behind what you're saying, and then it goes viral, and that's how we get to this point of having these discussions. So I just think in general, like, there's no real critical analysis going into a lot of this discourse.
Not at all.
So I don't know.
No critical thinking.
Yeah, this is kind of like jumping ahead, but I feel like it relates to that. And it's the fact that sometimes I think people are quote tweeting and tweeting about this to get attention. Like, I think it's purposefully rage. Yeah, I think it's purposefully rage baiting a lot of the time, because it's either that the people don't consume, if they're, like, talking down on Thai BL, they don't consume Thai BL, and, like, vice versa.
100%.
But also, I'm kind of like, do they even believe the things that they're saying? I feel like it's just kind of to make people mad on purpose.
Especially on Elon Musk's current Twitter, where people can make a lot of money from getting impressions on their tweets and getting people to reply to their tweets and shit like that if they're verified accounts. Like, you can so clearly tell that a lot of it is rage baiting, and people fall into the trap, and then they get themselves caught up in the discussion. And that's why half the time I'm seeing, there was this one tweet going around where someone was like, show me a Thai BL that, I don't know, depicted actual queer something and wasn't just about sex. And, like, people were like, I get it, people wanted to advocate for their favorite Thai BLs and like, you know, there's this idea of like, okay, I want to prove this person wrong, but at the same time, I'm like, it's so clearly just
obviously
trying to bait
baiting.
you into like, and they were arguing with people like the videos and the shows that people were posting, like the person was arguing back with them with these like really ridiculous replies, and I'm just like, there's so much of it that's just
like
baiting. But once again, the current social media culture just encourages that.
Yeah, it's like you want to speak out. You want to speak out and you want to say something about it because you're like, that is a incorrect misconception, but also you're arguing with someone who has like two
with the troll
brains. So
yeah. It's just it's really, that's why it gets so frustrating to see how big this discourse gets, because a lot of it does start from those kind of tweets. And I'm just like, you guys just gotta like
chill. Just
enjoy your shit.
Don't give them attention. Don't
let some random account on Twitter that has 2 followers make you think that the shows you're watching and you care about aren't worth watching or caring about.
I would say don't get defensive, because getting defensive shows that you're insecure.
Yeah.
I'll also say this, sometimes it is really hard to hold back from saying something.
I know.
Sometimes I'm really like, I'm on the verge of clicking tweet, and then I'm like, no, you know what? I'm just gonna ignore this. It's almost a better comeback to just ignore somebody.
100%.
100%. Don't give them that attention.
Because that's what they want.
Yeah.
That's what we all want. Attention.
I mean, hey, we have a podcast, so we can't say
we can't say anything about that. I do hope we're not rage baiting, but
I don't think so. I hope not. I hope this isn't considered rage baiting.
On the other hand, if someone disagrees with us, please just like tell us why we're wrong.
Yeah. This is trying to like be a discussion of the different points that we've seen. So yeah, definitely we want the discussion, not the rage baiting. Please don't rage bait us in the comments. But okay, so the one topic that I had that I was able to formulate my thoughts on was this idea of fantasy versus realism in stories and in BL. So there seems to be like a generalization, and that kind of goes back to this tweet of like this person being like, show me a Thai BL that actually shows like a real queer story or whatever. There seems to be this generalization that Thai BL only produces like these goofy, fantastical BLs, while BLs from places like Korea or Japan lean more into the realism. I think we've talked a lot about fantasy being an element of the BL genre in general. But I also like want to go back to like, I want to say like, why is having a fantastical show a bad thing? Like, I don't think that makes it any less queer or any less worth watching or any less enjoyable. Like, I think that having shows that are goofy and fun and maybe not the most realistic are also things that queer media needs, and we've talked about that a lot. So this idea of putting like what is real in BL and what depicts real queerness versus fantastical queerness is just like a kind of like, I don't know, like why we've talked about before, why can't both things exist, and why does one have to be better than the other?
I think this, like, you can see this in rom-coms as well, like not just BL. Rom-coms are often like looked down upon, like they're not good or anything. Like, it's often, especially media consumed by women, that has to do with romance and stuff like that, is looked down upon. So I agree. I don't understand why that is like a thing. Like, a storytelling isn't exclusive to drama. Like, drama isn't the only way to tell a story. and it can be told in a good way, no matter, I mean, what it is about.
Yeah, exactly. And like I also like I think it's kind of just ignorant of a lot of Thai BL, both more serious and
Mm-hmm.
happy-go-lucky or goofy, that have tackled very real social issues within Thailand and the queer community.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we have shows like Not Me and Jack and Joker that are like going very heavily on social issues and
Mm-hmm.
issues of queer rights and things like that. But we've talked about even a lot of these goofy fantasy BLs have had very real statements about queer rights and marriage equality, and have managed to make those impactful statements within a show that is otherwise deemed as not being a very serious show. So like I think it's kind of ignorant to say like something that's comedic or goofy or leaning into the silly side of things can
Mm-hmm.
also be tackling real issues within queerness or social issues or whatever within that show. And so like I think it's goofy to say that like, oh, Thai BL only makes goofy shows that don't actually say anything, because
Mm-hmm.
first of all, it's just not true. But also like even if they did only make goofy shows, there's still plenty of examples of those who have. And even if they didn't, why can't we watch goofy shows that don't
Yeah.
always have to make like a big statement in them, you know? Like sometimes we just want to have that escapism that BL has offered for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
how to like word what I'm trying to say, but maybe part of it, like the not perceiving some of the silly, goofy shows as being good representation or whatever, comes from like this place of almost like projecting one's own suffering
Mm,
onto it. Like,
mm,
like I went through this hard thing. I'm seeing it depicted in this show. So this is how it is. Like that's real
mm-hmm,
representation, as opposed to this other thing that is like happy, and it's just like my experience wasn't happy. So
mm-hmm,
this
mm-hmm.
doesn't hold value for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of queer media, especially like a couple of years ago, like everything is tragic. Like everything. Like, there's
Yeah.
no happy ending in queer media, or wasn't. So it's definitely like it seemed like it had to be. It wasn't. It wasn't queer media without the tragedy, because like you couldn't relate to
Mm-hmm.
anything
Yeah.
being
I
happy.
think
Uh,
what I'm trying to say is that like something doesn't have to necessarily resonate with you specifically for it to be valid.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's valid in wanting to watch a show that maybe captures a real queer experience that you went through, tackle on issues that people have experienced personally. Having the darker side of things is obviously very important for queer history and like the
mhm.
things that the queer
Yeah.
community has
Absolutely.
experienced. But like, yeah, that is all valid, but that also doesn't make it less valid to enjoy or want to see shows that are more on the less serious side of things, or just
Mhm.
goofy or so completely out there that like, I mean, there's so many shows that are heterosexual or ensemble shows or whatever that are
Mhm.
just rooted in out of this world goofiness. So like, why
Mhm.
can't we also have that but it be queer and also still be a good show and a show that's worth watching for people? You know, if it
Mhm.
doesn't work for you, that's fine, but like it's also like you don't need to look down on its existence.
Yeah, and I think like if you prefer the style of KBLs or the style of Japanese or the style of Thai BLs, that is fine. You're allowed to have a preference there. What
Mhm.
you're not allowed to do is talk shit about others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like literally, like, yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and shame people for like enjoying a certain country's BL more than others. I'm sure we
Yeah.
all have preferences ourselves around that as well. But like, we're all BL fans at the end of the day, and we're all advocating for and enjoying this queer media that is, you know, this little niche community of media that we found. So like it's so weird to have like a superiority complex on either side of things, because it's like, babe, we're on the same family. Like any outsider who looks at either of these shows that doesn't know or appreciate BL is gonna have thoughts against it or have weird thoughts about it. So it's so
We need
weird to have like this
stick together,
superiority complex
honestly.
within the genre. And like, I don't know, dude. It's just
Yeah.
It
Yeah. Having a preference was like never the issue.
mhm,
It's looking down on other people's preferences, I guess. Like kind of berating them, being like, ooh, why do you like that over this thing that
mhm,
you perceive as
mhm.
better?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question, and it ties a little bit into this, but not completely. I saw on Twitter, someone asked, um, "Is queer stories, TV shows, whatever, made in the Western area? Can you call that BL, or is it just Asian?"
Uh, yeah, I think we've seen
Mm,
this discussion before because, like, you know, we've talked about shows like Heartstopper and Young Royals on here, and like have gotten people being like, well, that's not BL. Like, I think there are elements of BL that are, I don't know. I feel like I don't know if I'm in a
It's
place
a
to say that
hard
that are specific
question.
to Asia.
Yeah.
But I feel like there
I
are elements of BL that are specific to BL that separate it from a
Mhm.
lot of Western
I think
queer media.
also it has a
mhm.
little bit to do culturally, because, like, if you take a queer story in Norway where queerness is m- m- more accepted, or at least not openly berated or looked down on, it's socially wrong to talk down queer people. The story is gonna be different.
Hmm.
um if you look at like Young Royals and Scum, they're inherently different than Asian. But I don't know, like, if you could classify, like, okay, um I, I the same discussion I've seen around anime. If the anime author and drawer, artist,
Artist, yeah.
Mhm.
lives in a Western country, can you still call it anime, even if it's the same style as the Japanese? Or do they have to be from Japan for it to be anime? Is it the style? Is it the artist? What makes it anime? Because anime is just
It's a good
animation. If
question.
you go to Japan and watch a Pixar movie, they're going to call that anime because it means animation.
Hmm.
But in the Western hemisphere, people have a totally different view of what anime is.
Hmm.
But, like,
I don't
yeah,
know if I
that's
have
what
an
I'm
answer.
saying. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's very difficult to, like, um what do you call it? Like, describe
Hmm.
what something is
Hmm.
and
Mhm.
what it's not. And it's
Mhm.
the same discussions around um, queer media and BL, because they are sort of flowing into each other nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the
Mhm.
line has definitely got a lot, the lines of the two have definitely gotten a lot closer. I mean, I know I certainly use the term interchangeably for some of these shows, and even just when I'm talking about BL at large, I will call it queer media because I think it is in the genre of queer media. Like I think it's its
Umbrella
own
term.
subgenre of queer media.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You know, I think when you're talking about things like anime or BL, like there are, I guess some people might tie it back to the history of it.
Mhm.
Um, but specifically where like the use of terms like anime and BL started, maybe that might be why people think that anime is only coming from Japan or BL is only coming from Asia, because there's history tied back to those
What
words
about
in that.
yaoi? Is that just Japanese?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like I'm saying like people are tying it back to the history of
Yep.
those words, but
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that like those things are the only thing that fall into that category, if that makes
Yep.
sense. But I think
Yep.
it's tied back to
Mhm.
where the words often historically came from.
Mm-hmm.
So like the term boys love specifically, or girls love, or yaoi or yuri, have so long been tied to like these shows in Asian media that I think
Mm-hmm.
people have a hard time like
Associating.
associating those terms with Western shows and vice versa. So
Yeah.
like, I mean, we don't really have a term for queer media in the West aside from like
Mm-hmm.
queer media or
Yeah.
LGBTQ media. But if there
Yeah.
was like a specific term for it, I feel like people would also probably have like the same thing of like, oh, well, you shouldn't call a BL X term if it existed, because, you know, like there's
Mm-hmm.
that history tied to it. So maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to, I don't know if there's really an answer that I'm
Yeah.
qualified to give.
I
I'm
don't
not,
know.
I'm sure there's academics who can really break that down, but
There's probably someone that could discuss this really well, but I don't think there's like a proper answer.
yeah,
Like I think we can
No.
discuss this
100%
to the
answer.
ground, but there's not a right answer to this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I also think that question can kind of be tied back into this like separation of East Asian versus Southeast Asian BL. Because like you come
Mm,
back to, it's all BL. So
mm,
why, you know, I don't know. I can't wrap my head around like why there is like this weird infighting within all of it when it's all sitting in the same subgenre at the end of the day.
yeah.
Um, and like I said, we're all in the
I mean,
same
they're even
family.
doing remakes from different, like from Thailand to Japan or Japan to Thailand. Like, it's the same thing. It's
Yeah.
just they have different styles
Yeah.
depending on like the country, and culturally, you're gonna have some changes as well because
Mhm.
not every country is the same, and that's the
Mhm.
same. Like, series from Norway is gonna look a lot different than a show from America,
Mhm. Mhm.
which
Mhm.
we've seen in remakes that have gone to Hollywood of Norwegian shows, and it's different.
I always think of when not a Norwegian show, but I always think of when America tried to do a remake of Skins, and it
Mm,
was just uh, horrendous because there are like cultural elements of these shows that like
mm.
if you're
You
going
can't
to adapt them,
translate.
I think
Yeah.
like, and that's why it's called an adaptation, because you need to
Mm,
adapt it to the culture, the country, the audience that's watching it, and like you can't
yeah.
just copy paste
The
one
the
show into your own.
Yeah, I still cringe when I think about it, but when they did a Hollywood version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, it is
Oh.
the most
Mm.
heartbreaking thing, cringy thing I've ever seen. And the original show is so good. And I
Hmm.
was just like, the Hollywood was trash. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Some people probably liked it, but then they haven't seen the original.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you get back, like when we come back to this discourse of like remakes, because I think it is also a big part of this discussion and this discourse.
Mm,
Like the remakes also bring it up a lot. But yeah, it's interesting how like on the one hand, people don't want it to be remade because they
mhm.
know that things are going to have to change for it to be able to adapt to the culture of the country that's remaking it, the media
Yep.
style of the country that's remaking it. But at the
Mhm.
same time, like if they just like if Japan had just
Made it
verbatim
the
remade Love in the
same.
Air, people would have
Yeah,
hated it. So it's like you
yeah.
don't want them to
Yeah.
change anything, but and so I guess you know you get back into the cycle of like, well, they just shouldn't do adaptations at all. But like so much of
But
BL is
that's not
already an
fair
adaptation of
either.
novels from other
Yeah.
countries. My Stand-In was an adaptation of, you know, a Chinese novel. So many of
Yeah.
these shows are adaptations of novels or webtoons originating in other countries. So it's like most of the BL you're watching is an adaptation of some sort. So
Yeah.
like again, I'm asking this question of, tell me why you don't want another country to adapt this thing in a way that is not like racist. Like, give me a reasoning that's not tying back to racism or xenophobia, because I really think that is, like Kayla said at the beginning, one of the big elephants in the room when it comes to this discussion is the racism and xenophobia around a lot of it. So I don't know.
I agree.
I don't know. So we did have some other topics that we didn't really have time to go full research into and kind of researching out, but other things that might relate to these topics are people wanting to position themselves closer to whiteness and the effects of colonization on Southeast Asia, which like a lot of these things, like these all could be like whole episodes in and of themselves. The K-popification of Thai BL, which I know, Kayla, you've done a video on that before, haven't you? Kind of talking about that phenomenon. So definitely go watch Kayla's video on that if you haven't. The fetishization of East Asian men, that's a big one in recent years as well, with K-pop and Asian drama getting bigger in the larger world sphere. Some people not considering Southeast Asians due to displacement caused by Indochina and the Vietnam Wars, as well as Kayla's arch enemy, colonialism. I think that's everyone's arch enemy. Colonialism is the grand arch enemy here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I feel like there are so many aspects of this discussion that could be full episodes in and of themselves, which is why I'm like, so I was like, disclaimer, like, this is a very nuanced discussion and we're trying to talk about it in an hour. So, there's only so much that we can cover, and so much of this has a lot of research and history tied to it. But at the end of the day, I think it's just worthwhile for people to examine where their biases around certain media are coming from, and why you might hold a certain prejudice against a BL from any of these countries that we've discussed. It goes both ways. It definitely goes both ways. Like, it's not just one way or the other. I think certain discussions are more prevalent in terms of like certain groups of fans based, if that makes sense. I don't know if I worded that in a way that makes sense, but I think the discussions are more prevalent in certain spaces, but it's definitely a thing that goes both ways and goes across fans of all of these different countries' BLs. So I think it's just worthwhile to people kind of sit back and examine where their biases are coming from. I feel like it makes me so sad because all of these countries have created a BL that I really, really, really love. And it's so wild to me for people to say that, like, I'm only going to watch BL from one country, because I feel like you're limiting yourself so much when we've seen this genre expand so much over the past few years. Like, it makes me sad, honestly.
Yeah. 100%. There's so much good stuff out there. And if you're going to limit yourself to a country, you're going to miss out. And that's the same, like, we could say the same about, like, people for Western countries refusing to watch anything that has subtitles to it. Like, you're missing out.
Yeah, I always think about Parasite, when Bong Joon-ho and Parasite won the Oscars. And it's another thing like Squid Game. It's people like, where did this movie come from? Like, where did this show come from? I'm like, well, if you open your mind a little bit to media from places you might not have previously watched it before, you would have a lot of different perspectives. And I think that ties back into this niche genre of BL. If like you open your mind to different countries or shows that you might not have previously considered being up your alley, you might be very surprised about what you might find and enjoy and what these shows have to say, and how they depict things. So yeah, I think, I don't know, there's just so much to BL, and it's
expand your world by watching a lot of
your BL world. Your world in general and your BL world.
There's so much BL out there now, and so many different kinds, and there's so many good BLs on like a variety of topics and spice level and everything. Like,
Yeah. In the year 2024, when the genre has grown so much, I just don't think you can attribute any one specific quality to BL from any country, because they all have so much now and so many different genres and so many different elements that they're bringing in. So to boil BL from any country down to one thing is just, it's ignorant, and it's just wrong at this point. Like, it's not right, because the BL genre is so saturated now that like you're literally just making an incorrect argument.
yeah.
Like that's just the bottom line. Like, your argument is incorrect at this point in time. So
Yeah. It's also pretty disrespectful to the culture to categorize it in a certain way, because then it's like, so you're categorizing the country like that, you're categorizing the people like that. It's like a slippery slope of racism and xenophobia.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, does anyone have any final thoughts before we kind of round this one out?
Just like in general, stop arguing online about stupid shit.
No, I love that. That's a good word of advice.
Yeah. Curate your fandom spaces. I mean,
Yeah.
I know it's really hard because like, I'm bringing it back to Twitter because that's where I've seen this discourse the most. The way Twitter operates now is they've made it very hard to just see what you want to see on your feed. But for a happy fandom life, use the block button freely. Find communities that hold values and hold discussions that you like to be involved in. And if you see some stupid shit, just try your best to scroll past it. Don't buy into the rage baiting. And yeah, just, sit back. I think we can benefit from it, sitting here having this discussion. I think anyone can kind of benefit from just taking some time to sit back and examine where their biases come from, what informs them, and maybe doing a little bit of research and understanding to see beyond that. So.
Yeah. And I will also argue that the diversity of like spicy scenes and all of that is very healthy for the genre, because it lends to more variety, and the word is not coming to me. Inclusion.
Yeah.
Which will grow the genre.
Yeah.
Let it grow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
That's like a what is it? Diversity and inclusion lesson for you.
Core values. We're tackling core values here on Lovecast.
I mean, diversity and inclusion is kind of what we do here.
Yeah.
We try. We certainly try. Like I said, obviously we're a limited perspective, so
Yeah.
we can only tackle it from the perspectives that we have. But I think the point is to try and open the discussion to other respectful perspectives as well. So be sure to share your thoughts with us as well. And thank you for sticking with us through a rather intense episode. Like we said many a times, it's a topic that has a lot of nuance, but we felt it was pretty important to address, especially right now when it's kind of circling in the online spaces again. At the end of the day, like, every country has their own approach to BL, and it's okay to prefer one over the other, but let's not generalize any of them in a negative way, because that's not helping anyone.
Nope.
Each culture has its unique culture that it brings to BL, and we feel like that should be celebrated and not degraded at all. So yeah, share your thoughts with us down below. Join the discussion. We really want to see what kind of discussion this will facilitate. So And if you enjoyed the episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. While you're at it, why not share the episode with your friends? That kind of stuff always really helps us out. You can also check out our Patreon for early access to episodes, reviews, and a lot of other exclusive content as well. Links to that and all of our other socials are down below in the description. But that's all we have for you guys for this week's episode. So until we see you again, bye-bye.
Bye.